in a virtual setting here. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And I can only imagine what the last few weeks have been like for you and for your team. So I'd love to kind of just start there and just tell me a little bit more about, what you have seen over the last few weeks, and how your team has kind of reacted.
Yeah, it's really an unbelievable time. I think what we experienced first as a team was probably similar to other companies, which was just trying to get a handle on what are the facts of this situation? How serious is this coronavirus? Is it really going to impact business? And then once it became clear and the CDC came out with clear direction, we've been working from home and we've pivoted all of our in-person trainings to a virtual format. So my team has been engaged and actually very busy trying to stay in touch with our clients and keep all of our trainings on the rails, even now that everybody's working from home and we're doing things in a virtual format.
That's awesome. You have to be able to adapt, as I'm
For
sure
sure.
we've all seen that. A week or two ago, this was not where I was doing my workout of. This is where my dogs were sleeping at night, but now it's where I spend a good portion of my day. And I know we've all been able to adapt. And you mentioned doing some of the virtual training, which is super important.
Hmm.
One question that I have, and this is something I've posed to a lot of business leaders and HR executives I've talked to over the last few weeks. Is there one question, or what is one request that you and your team has received ever since, let's go back to, I think it was around Friday the 13th when everything really started to shift? What is like that one thing that you've been requested?
Yeah, I think it largely has to do with helping people identify what we call their crisis priorities. So reminding people, go back and consult your core values and then come back and ask yourself, what are the three most important things right now and why? Because with as quickly as things have been changing, a lot of the strategic plans and initiatives that a lot of our clients had in process really had to be set aside, and kind of a whole new mini strategy or crisis plan had to be put in place. So we've tried to be available, to be thinking partners with our CEOs and our HR leaders to really help them figure out what are we focused on and why, and then most importantly, how does that affect the people in
Hmm.
the business? Because that's really communicating in a clear, empathetic, and transparent way, and staying connected in meaningful ways to your people is really everything during a time like this.
Something you mentioned, I guess maybe caught me off guard, and I didn't necessarily think of this, but you kind of referred to implementing like the current crisis strategy.
Mhm.
So that's something that you work with executives and teams on, is preparing for a crisis, maybe not this particular crisis, but like what kind of goes into building a strategy from a leadership perspective when dealing with a crisis, even if it isn't something to the magnitude that we've seen with the coronavirus?
Yeah, I think the first thing it's very important is you need leadership teams who are able to come together and first confront the brutal facts. What are the facts, the financial fitness of the business, what's happening with our customers, what parts of our business have become obsolete given the shutdowns and things. So confronting the brutal facts and understanding what are we actually dealing with is really the first piece. And then I think the thinking really shifts to, okay, given that, how do we protect the core? What are our
Mhm.
core operations and who are our core people that we may have to redeploy in slightly different ways? And how do we start to, it's really about identifying we're moving from this to these things. It's a from to, and the leader's role is really to clarify that for people so that people understand those things we were doing, we're not doing those right now, but we are focused on these things, and here's why. And then
Mhm.
that's where you start to move into providing optimism, and you're able to put a game plan in front of your team so that people have something to focus on and still feel connected to.
And just knowing you and knowing the Advisa team and the way that you all operate, I'm sure there's a little bit practicing what you preach internally, right? Has there been any challenges that you've dealt with internally as a leader, or any learning opportunities, let's maybe phrase it that way, that you've seen for, leading the ADVISA team over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge has been figuring out how much transparency about the financial fitness of the business and what that means in terms of plan A, plan B, plan C. So yeah, we've done a lot of modeling. Of course, during times like this, cash is king. Thankfully, at Advisa, we have no debt and we're in a really strong cash position. So I made the decision to just share all of that with the team and to clarify that our top priority during this time, aside from everyone's health and wellness, but our top business priority is retaining our clients and retaining our team. So we do not intend to cut jobs. We if we have to, as we go through those, best case, worst case scenarios, we'll be cutting salaries. So, I mean, that kind of transparency takes a lot of bravery.
Hmm.
But I will say, I mean, that's what people are worried about.
Right.
Everyone sitting out there is thinking, uh-oh, what does this mean for me and my job and my ability to provide for my family? So I think I've just tried to be really honest about my own emotions going through all this. I mean, we're a small business. We're not a huge company. And so small businesses everywhere are wrestling with, what are we going to do, with whom, and how do I share that to keep people engaged and still feeling connected in meaningful ways?
I really appreciate you sharing that, Heather. And I just think that level of transparency that you just showed with our audience, right, is really what it comes down to, right? We have to be human, we have to be empathetic, we have to be vulnerable to an extent. And I appreciate you sharing that, because I think it's helpful for everyone to know that everyone's dealing with this right now, right? Every leader, there's no one that is exempt from this. This is not discriminatory. So I appreciate you sharing that, Heather. And it really shows just the work that you do, and how awesome the team is at Advisa. So grateful for that, and grateful to have you here and to answer some questions. So as I mentioned when we first started, we are going to be doing a live Q&A. We have had some previously submitted questions from our community, so I'm going to jump into those here in a second. But just wanted to let everyone know, as a reminder, use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of your screen to type in your question. We will all see that on this side. The host and the panelists will be able to see those and answer those. And then if you would like to ask your question using audio, we can go ahead and raise your hand. If you don't want to do that, don't click the raise your hand, because you'll get called on regardless. But I'm going to dive into some of the questions that we had already received from our community. And I think you touched on this a little bit, but during a crisis like what we're seeing with COVID-19, what are your people wanting to hear? What is your team wanting to hear? You mentioned the transparency, which I think is a big piece of it. But are they looking for, or what type of response, I should say, are they looking for from you as a leader?
Yeah, I think they're looking for consistent communication from me. So a regular cadence of touching base weekly with the team via Teams. We use Microsoft Teams. We're doing a lot of Zoom gatherings. But as a leadership team, we're each getting on there every Monday morning and sharing what we call our top three. These are the
Okay.
3 things I'm focused on this week. Last Friday, I did a video for the whole team where I took our strategic plan that I rolled out last December, and I put up that Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And then I proceeded to share with everyone, these are our new priorities. We were doing this, forget that, we're focused here. So I just think my team is really craving that ongoing clarity of priorities so that everybody has confidence that they're working on the right things and that they play an important role in the new plan. And then the other thing I know my team is craving is connection. So we've done some team happy hours. We've created some lighter channels on Microsoft Teams where we can still have some fun and bring some light and optimism into a tough situation.
No, I appreciate that. I think as the resident extrovert on the
Right.
team, I'm feeling that a little bit as well. And one escape for me has just been having virtual coffee and sometimes cocktail meetings with a lot of the same people in the community that I'm usually talking to, right? And I've actually found myself being more efficient and being able to have more of those by limiting the time and really keeping to 30 minutes, which is a little bit easier to manage when you're remote versus when you're in a heated conversation with someone in a coffee shop. So
I
I
completely agree.
I definitely am feeling that as well. And you talked a lot about kind of the leadership internal, or excuse me, the transparency from a leadership perspective internally. This is geared a little bit more towards like that external facing, right? But what are your thoughts of when it's okay to be transparent with your customers, particularly kind of sharing this similar level of transparency with your customers compared to what you shared internally?
Yeah, I think what customers first want from us is empathy. Every business out there is going through the same critical, evaluation of cash and priorities that we are. So I think now is a time externally when your customers want to, they want to feel supported by you and they want flexibility. That's what they're going to want from us. Flexibility in some cases in terms of payment terms,
Hmm.
flexibility in some cases with regard to, I just can't talk to you right now. We've got to pick this back up in a couple months. But the key thing I think for us, we're in the relationship business. I mean, we form long-term relationships with our clients. We do a lot of training, a lot of coaching. So this is a time to just touch all the sheep, so to speak, and be present, seek to understand their circumstances, and just be helpful where you can. That's how we're trying to show up for and meet our customers and clients where they are.
Absolutely. I think empathy is something to be utilized internally, externally, even in, personally with friends and
Mhm.
family, and understanding what they're dealing with and how it may or may not be different than what you're dealing with. So that's something that I think really resonates with a lot of people. Another thing that we've heard a lot about, and you mentioned this earlier with kind of Team ADVISA going virtual and remote pretty quickly. A majority of companies have moved to this like remote. It's more like it's not just remote, it's work from home, right?
Yeah.
Remote can mean I'm traveling the country and I have the ability to still to work, right?
Yep.
Now everyone is working from home. So what are some of the best ways to maintain a high level of performance to your team as a leader when leading remotely?
Yeah, I think it's really important the communication, like I mentioned. I mean, it's hard enough to communicate when you're sharing the same physical space with people, let alone when you're not seeing people and you can't interpret tone and nonverbals. So, adding in some one-on-one touch points, I think, is very important. Even if you're gathering together to keep a cadence of team meetings going, you still need to make sure that you're giving people a call one-on-one so that you can really ask those more genuine questions of how are you doing? How is it working from home? Is everybody healthy? Those kinds of things I think are critical, as well as keeping in mind that when people are afraid, some of the sharper edges of their personality tendencies can really come out. So for those of us who are using any kind of behavioral insight tool like the predictive index, which is what our clients use, that information is like gold right now because some of us need control to feel confident, some of us need certainty, some of us need social connection. So I really encourage people where you have access to that kind of personal and individual information, that's the best way to stay connected virtually is really customize and tailor your communications to try to meet people's individual needs.
Yeah, I like the example of talking to the person, right?
Yeah.
Like checking in on the person, because as leaders we see kind of this work persona, right? And because so many people are now mixing the home and work, like it's literally kind of the same thing for me. I have to shut my office door and say, no, that's work, those are for work hours, right? But at the same time, hearing from someone on my team, even just staying a couple minutes extra on like a team call to have a couple more minutes of conversation, those are really the things that is really kind of helping our team thrive. So I appreciate you sharing that. It looks like we do have a question from the audience. So this is from Victor. I believe it's Aguilar is how you say that. And I think we're going to go ahead and go to Victor right now. Victor, are you able to hear us? And would you like to ask your question live?
Yeah, sure. So I've been paying attention a lot to CNBC during this whole crisis, and something that Mark Cuban mentioned that kind of stuck out to me. He mentioned that companies, the way they treat their employees during this time period could define their brand for decades to come.
Mhm.
What do you think leaders should be prioritizing to make sure that they have their employees' best interests in mind, so that, you know, when this is all over, they can look back and feel confident that they did what was right?
Yeah, I think honesty is the most important. Sometimes honesty is delivering bad news. Sometimes honesty is being really transparent about how the business is thriving and potentially struggling. I think that when people are afraid, and many employees out there are afraid, or at least somewhat uncertain, I think when you provide honest information, I mean, we don't need to have all the answers, but we do need to be accessible and share what we know. I think that really helps people rise to the occasion. You would be amazed at the stories that I'm hearing, and I think people have put some things out that when you're honest with your employees about the state of the business and sort of what the options are for keeping the business going during this time, most employees are really willing to step up and say, I'll take a salary cut. What can I do? I'll shift my role. I'll step up over here. It's when leaders are not honest, or when leaders are trying to pretend that everything's okay when it's not. So I think that honesty is really important, and then not to be repetitive, but the genuine empathy. You have to make sure that your employees know that you care about them and you value them. So the more that you can tell them those things in group settings as well as one-on-one, and really shine a light on people who are displaying your core values, man, there's no better time than right now to really elevate your core values and highlight people who are living those out. And where your team knows that you've done everything you can do to both protect the business and protect their jobs. Yes, I agree with Mark Cuban. The way you treat employees during this time will redefine or underscore the employer brand that you already had going.
I love that perspective, Heather. And one thing I've heard a lot, just kind of through social media chatter, is, you know, if you weren't prioritizing culture before all of this, and especially like with that massive shift from one week being in the office to the next, hire, you know, everyone remote, and some people having to make difficult decisions for their business. If you aren't prioritizing it a year ago, well, it's too late now, right? And how can you prioritize it when you've got a million other things working? So, you know, you and I both subscribe to this thought that culture is important, and companies that have built this culture have these cultural values and preferences, or that's going to help, you know, with a talent attraction perspective, that's going to help with a leadership perspective. But if you weren't thinking about this before all this, it's kind of hard to add another thing on top of your plate as a leader, if you weren't thinking about culture, you know, a year ago.
Yeah, it is hard because culture is really the glue that keeps people together during times when circumstances are pulling us apart. So I think I feel that here at ADVISA. And the other thing I would tell you, that this time is really unique in that it's an opportunity for organizations to look for leaders.
Hmm.
You're gonna see people step up in unexpected ways. You want to be listening for who's bringing solutions to the table without being asked, who's volunteering to take on something extra, who are the people that are continually thinking about the greater good and not self-protection. These are people who in their regular day jobs and the way things typically go, we might not notice them. So as you experience your culture differently now, I really strongly encourage people to look for leadership potential, because this is the best time to see those stripes come out. And that way, when things turn around, you have a real clear picture of who your best and brightest are, and how to really start investing in them.
Are some of the same things that emerging leaders per se, some of the same traits you mentioned that leaders are exhibiting, are people seeing the same thing from those emerging leaders?
Yes, I think in particular, your emerging leaders are going to be the ones who are asking you the tough questions. Maybe you share, here's plan A, here's the plan, gang, let's all go. Your emerging leaders are going to say, that sounds great. What's plan B and C and D? The people who are thinking like that and pushing you to communicate with more clarity, and the people who are pushing you to think outside the box during this time, maybe you've never done it that way before, but now is different and you could try something different. I think these are the people that really rise to the top.
That's awesome. I appreciate that perspective. That was taking one of our community submitted questions and kind of weaving in an extra layer. So that was one of the questions that was asked. So I appreciate that. This next question is anonymous, but it's kind of combining a lot of what we're talking about with like the leadership perspective, but then also the business perspective. So it says, as a leader, what steps can I take today to better position my company and most profitably serve my customers as these shifts are happening and as we get through all of this?
Mhm. So I think identifying those crisis or critical priorities to kind of protect the core of your business. So, the ways that you can conserve cash, the ways that you can maximize collections, you know, cut costs, all of those things. But beyond the financial pieces, I strongly encourage you to really think about the talent piece, because as your business priorities and initiatives change, you need to make sure you know how to redeploy talent and get your leaders refocused and reengaged to what we call unfreeze their teams. Teams can feel kind of stuck, especially if there's a lot of change. So I think really building those communication loops so that people are building trust in new ways and they can be flexible in how they are working. Some of these changes that have happened, the remote work and the virtual training and cross-functional teams, these things are going to stay. Some of these things we're proving out that there are new work arrangements that can be very effective and even lower cost. So right now is a time, I think, in the back of your mind to keep this like continuous learning mindset. Even though we're in the midst of a crisis, what can we learn that
Mhm.
equips us to get back to profitability faster than our competition?
So you mentioned talent, and I know there's this kind of this focus from ADVISA's perspective on optimizing talent.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of I've talked to a lot of talent acquisition leads and HR people over the last few weeks who are saying, "Hey, we're on a hiring freeze right now." But that doesn't mean that this is going to sustain. So, any advice on companies that are kind of balancing, how can I continue to engage talent? How can I continue to create this perspective or awareness of our company from an employer branding perspective, but I'm not currently hiring right now and I can't act on it right now?
Yeah, I think that's one of the greatest things to contemplate, because we went from a talent scarcity situation, 3% unemployment. I think now we're at about 10, and estimates say that's going to go up to 20% unemployment. I mean, we are experiencing one of the biggest talent, job seeking, shifting times ever. You've got more people on the move. They've been displaced, and soon they're all going to be scrambling to find their next position. So for companies who are in a strong cash position, there is no better time than the present and in the coming weeks to find top talent. So even if you're on a hiring freeze, I would encourage all of you who are in recruiting or talent acquisition, you can still talk to people. You can still reach out, have phone calls, and then there's where you use those the E, the T, the C that I talked about earlier: empathy, transparency, and clarity. Be clear with candidates. We're on hiring freeze right now. This is the situation. However, attracting top talent is the key to our future success. So I wanted to go ahead and connect with you and tell you about who we are, tell you about how our culture is pulling us through this really challenging time, because when things change, I'd love to get you in here for an interview.
I really I appreciate that perspective, and I think a lot of people in a variety of roles are feeling that internally, right? Because as we've seen, it's not just about the talent acquisition leaders or the recruiters, right? Like this talent piece, because we were in such a need of talent, right? Especially in the tech community, we're seeing more and more leaders that are out actively networking and connecting with others to create more awareness for them as a leader, to help make them a magnetic destination, if you will, from a culture perspective. So I appreciate that perspective. And I want to make another call out to anyone else that has any questions. We've got a few more here that were submitted anonymously, but would love to hear from you. If you're tuning in, be sure to use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. And then we'll be sure to take some more of those live if you'd like. If you don't want to hop on and use your audio, or if you're in the middle of a teaching session doing some e-learning, that's totally cool as well. Just throw your question in the Q&A box here. But I do have another one here from our community that was submitted anonymously. And it's definitely more geared towards the opportunistic side. And it says, in your perspective, Heather, what are some of the biggest opportunities that can exist for me and my company that are going to turn this unfortunate negative situation potentially into a positive for my business perspective?
Yeah, I think there is a real opportune time for training, believe it or not. It doesn't mean you have to necessarily spend a lot of money on training. I think most of us have what I call back burner-ish things, things that are important, but maybe not urgent. And a lot of times training is one of those things. So if you're running a sales team, what are some of the sales best practices that you could pull out and dust off and get your team on the phone and sharpen the saw? If you run, an operations team, what are some process improvements? What are some Six Sigma or Kaizen events that you've done in the past to identify how to make some changes, but you just never got around to making them? Those are the things that I would be focused on, is how do we just stay sharp and stay connected? Beyond that, if there is funds to invest in virtual training, this is a great time for it. I mean, people have time on their hands. What better thing to do than meet them where they are in their home office, craving connection and learning and development. So I think that learning new things in community with other people who are in a similar experience is one of the most helpful and cathartic things that we can do. It helps people feel better to learn something new and be along with other people for the ride.
That's a great perspective. And sorry, I thought for a second I lost you and I closed the screen, which I didn't. It's okay. Another question that we have here that's similar, but more of like, if you're in a position right now where you are managing up and adjusting to a new level of management above you, and then you have a team that reports to you as well, and you're kind of managing down to an extent. Let's say that you're caught in a little bit of the friction, right? You talked about the glue, or culture being the glue that holds everything together. But any advice for someone who's dealing with maybe not quite the transparency when they're reporting up, but they want to be able to provide the level of transparency to their direct reports?
Yeah, that's a tough situation. And so I'll just answer honestly how I would handle that if I were in those shoes. I think I would have a one-on-one with my manager, and I would share from my heart that I don't personally feel like we're providing enough transparency or enough of the facts about our situation to keep people engaged and to help people feel connected and safe during this time. And then I would ask a question. I would say, I'm sure you're privy to information and decisions that I'm not, but is there anything more that you could share with me that would just help me give what I can to my team? And so potentially by calling that out, that you have a need and a desire for more information or transparency, I hope that you're in an organization and you have enough of a trusted relationship with that supervisor that it would be okay for you to ask that question. If you feel like you don't have that safety or that trust isn't there, then I think all you can do is make the best of the information that you do have. And I would be trying to definitely not lament or complain about what I'm not getting. Instead, I would shift all my attention and all my team's attention to, okay, guys, this is really hard. I feel like we're putting together a puzzle without the box top here.
Right.
But what do we know? And what can we control? And I would just keep bringing my team right back to what are the things we can control and what are the things we can take personal accountability for right now to do and change and make a difference, even though maybe we're not getting the full picture, and even though in the broader organization we don't feel secure.
I love your perspective, Heather, and it comes across as so genuine. And you can tell that it's a combination of your training, your experience, but also just being a leader and helping others, which it's kind of hard to be empathetic in some of those values that you shared in times of chaos and crisis. It's hard to be that way. So I really do appreciate you sharing that. And I think that'll be that's all that we have in terms of Q&As. But you talked about something that is near and dear to our heart here at Powder Keg. And it's kind of the idea and the dynamic when it comes to jobs. And what's unique about Powder Keg is we have a place for people to connect and a place for people to find jobs, ideally a job that they love. So I want to give a quick shout out here to our job network, where anyone that's watching that has experience in tech, they can join the thousands of top professionals in the Powder Keg community to get connected with the hottest tech companies between the coast. And you can do so by visiting powderkeg.com/jobs and fill out a quick form. Tell us a little bit about yourself, get matched, and then make moves. So be sure to check that out and join the Powder Keg Talent Network today at powderkeg.com/jobs. And as Heather can attest to, every company's culture is very unique, and it aligns with different members of their team for a variety of different reasons. And so we've actually been able to capture some of these cultural preferences and attributes that talent is looking for. We're able to capture it from the company's perspective by creating a culture profile. So I want to just take a second here and show everyone, really what a culture profile looks like, because ADVISA obviously prioritizes culture, and this is something, as you can see here on the screen, that is really robust and built out. But these profiles are just one of the ways people that join our talent network, and people just in the general public in general, can learn what it might be like to work at or with a company. And like I mentioned, here's ADVISA's culture profile. If you work at a tech company and you have yet to claim your profile, reach out to me directly. It's Casey@powderkeg.com, and we'll be happy to get the process started for you. Just a reminder, when everything is tight right now, there is no cost for you to have a company profile on powderkeg.com. So wanted to mention that real quick, and appreciate for your team for the work that they did in helping us build out the ADVISA culture profile. And this this program wouldn't be possible without some of our partners like ADVISA. So I mentioned this earlier, but ADVISA can really help companies develop their leaders, help you hire better people, get the most out of your teams, and really build a magnetic culture, which I know is so crucial outside of a time like this, but it's definitely magnified during a time like this. And ADVISA has an experienced team that has been building impactful leaders for years. Over 30 years, they've been working with companies from ExactTarget all the way to Lessonly to optimize their talent and their cultures. They were doing culture optimization way before it was cool. So be sure to check them out at advisa.com. And a final shout out to all of our other partners. These companies are all doing awesome work supporting the community during the coronavirus crisis. So a special shout out to CLA, Zotech Partners, KSM Consulting, Black Ink IT, and ADVISA. We couldn't do it without you all and with your support. So Heather, just wanted to thank you again for your time. If you did have a question and we weren't able to get it answered directly, feel free to reach out to me. Once again, Casey@powderkeg.com. Happy to get you connected with Heather. If you think they can be a resource for your team, feel free to reach out to us as well. We're happy to make an introduction. But thanks again, Heather, for your time. That's going to do it for today's show. A huge thanks again to our sponsors, and also a big thank you to our live stream audience and all of our listeners for being part of the Powder Keg community, to be among the first to hear the stories about entrepreneurs, investors, and other tech leaders building remarkable tech companies outside of Silicon Valley. Please subscribe to us on iTunes at powderkeg.com/iTunes. We'll be sure to catch you next time on the Powder Keg Podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heather.